5 gunshots tore through the quiet night at a cookout restaurant in Charlotte. As the ambulance's headlights flashed through the steamy windows, the image that struck everyone present froze. A young woman lying motionless on the cold tile floor, blood staining her apron, which still smelled of grease. She was only 26 years old. A single mother who had been singing softly during her shift to ease the fatigue of everyone else. Now there was only eternal silence. Her coworker, so panicked that she hid in the bathroom, whispered into the 911 phone, "Someone just got shot. We're too scared to come out." And the person who pulled the trigger, the one who momentarily shattered what had felt like a family, was a familiar coworker with no criminal record, no previous signs of violence. Before that night turned into a nightmare, Jaselyn Horne's life was like any other young person in Charlotte. She woke up every morning with the same motivation: to raise her 5-year-old son. Her family, friends, and customers at her small hair salon knew Jaselyn as a woman full of energy. During the day, she spent her time doing hair, the intricate braids, the meticulously tended locks, her pride and joy. At night, to earn a steady income, she took the late shift at Cookout on Sunset Boulevard. It was a grueling job that lasted until the wee hours of the morning, but she never complained. Coworkers described Jaselyn as a breath of fresh air during her dozens of hour shifts. She often sang softly while cleaning the kitchen, her smile enough to dispel the heavy drowsiness of that 24-hour restaurant. Not only did she work, she also drove her colleagues home after the night shift, always putting the safety and happiness of others before her own. No one could have expected that just a few months after taking this job, the very place she tried to cling to for a living would become the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. On the night of the 16th of March, 2024, the Cookout restaurant gradually closed its doors. The clock read just past 4 in the morning. The last customer had left. The space inside was filled with only the smell of cold food and the sound of brooms sweeping. 5 employees stayed behind to clean up, already used to this scene. Amidst the laughter and tired chatter, attention was quietly tightening. Malik Crosby, Jaselyn's colleague, was also a young man like everyone else. He was 20 years old, had never caused trouble, went to work regularly, and was polite to everyone. No one in the store or in the legal records had ever seen Malik with any signs of violence. However, since the beginning of the evening shift, he and Jaselyn had been arguing over who would clean which area. These kinds of arguments are not uncommon in any work environment, especially during the grueling night shift, where every second only adds to the tension. As time passed, the atmosphere became heavier. Malik began to curse. Jaselyn, who was not one to take humiliation lightly, retaliated. The other co-workers saw it, but no one thought it would go beyond a few grumbles. They believed that as long as they finished cleaning, everyone would go home, and everything would be fine the next day. But the argument did not end there. As the clock approached 5 a.m., the fateful moment occurred. Jaselyn, in a fit of rage, grabbed a frying pan and threw it at Malik. The heavy metallic sound rang out, hitting him square in the face. In a split second, no one had time to think. Malik pulled out a hidden gun, a weapon that was strictly forbidden in the store's rules, and pulled the trigger. 5 shots, echoing in the kitchen that was used to the sound of pots and pans. Jaselyn collapsed to the floor, her eyes wide open in shock, blood spreading quickly into a red pool. The rest, who considered each other family, now could only run away in despair. They hid in the bathroom, trembling, not daring to step outside. The 911 call rang out urgently, mixed with choked sobs. "Someone just got shot. We don't know what's going on." In the meantime, no one knew where Malik had run off to. No one knew if he was still right outside the door, pointing a gun at them. A restaurant that was supposed to be a stop for dinner tonight suddenly turned into a murder scene. And it all started with a dirty pan. But the question that haunted people for months afterward was, why would someone like Malik, with no criminal record, no history of violence, bring a gun to work? And in that moment, why did he choose to pull the trigger instead of walking away? There are many details that will leave you speechless. If you think this is a story worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. If sudden death often leaves a huge void, then for Jaselyn Horne, that void is even heavier because she left behind a 5-year-old boy. Her whole life revolved around that child. The boy could not understand the concept of loss, could not imagine why his mother did not come home after a shift like every other day. In her son's eyes, his mother was a silent hero, always there to pick him up, to comfort him, to smile brightly when he saw him happy. Jaselyn's father, Mr. John Horne, once said through tears, "She was my first daughter. She was a mother but still only 26 years old, and she could take on so much." Friends know Jaselyn for her beauty talent. She turned a small room in her house into a mini hair salon. Beauty by Jay. Customers come not only for her skillful braids or delicately styled hair, but also for her gentle smile and the pleasant atmosphere she brings. Her social media is filled with pictures of completed hairstyles, testament to her talented hands, and the dream of nurturing her creative work. However, like many young people struggling to survive, Jaselyn could not make ends meet by doing hairdressing alone. She took on a second job at Cookout, a place she considered a second family. The harsh night shifts, often lasting from dusk till dawn, did not deter her. Coworkers said she sang to pass the time. She laughed to relieve stress, and she did not hesitate to drive someone home if they did not have a car. In the last month before her murder, everything went on as usual. Malik Crosby was also on the night shift. He had no violent past and did not attract attention. If we talk about the difference, perhaps it was Malik's silence that made others think he was gentle, rarely angry. So no one on the night shift on the 16th of March could have imagined that a few hours later, he would be the focus of a shooting. That shift started like any other. They were busy until 4 a.m., serving the last customers. Then the restaurant closed, leaving only the cleaning job, the familiar but always the most tiring. Perhaps because of that fatigue, an argument about the division of responsibilities broke out. People often say that small tensions in a harsh environment can become a spark, but who could have thought that spark would lead to a murder? Jaselyn's coworker, who had witnessed her laughing and singing for a month, said through tears, "In my eyes, she never did anything wrong. It's unbelievable that someone like that would die right at work." The hardest thing to accept was not the argument that happened, but that someone like Malik brought a gun to work. The Cookout rules were clear. But that night, the mere presence of a gun turned a minor altercation into an irreversible tragedy. There was one detail that many people kept asking. Jaselyn had given rides home to colleagues, including Malik. They had laughed and shared the burden of grueling shifts. So why, in a matter of seconds, were all those memories erased, making way for 5 accidental and fatal gunshots? The answer may lie in the depths of the psyche that no one saw, but it may also never be found. Because what puzzled everyone more than the tragic death was the truth. Malik was not a convicted killer. He was a 20-year-old man with a steady job and no criminal record. So what made him bring a gun to the restaurant in the first place? Was there a lingering unease in his heart? Or was it all just a bad decision on a tiring night? As you think about that question, ask yourself, in your work environment, if an argument broke out, what would you do? Walk away quietly, or step in to stop it? And would timely intervention be enough to change Jaselyn's fate that night? There are more haunting details to come in the next part. If you want to know what happened when the police first arrived on the scene, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. As the final gunshots echoed off the tiled walls of the Cookout restaurant, A deadly silence fell over the room that had only minutes before been filled with tired chatter. The three surviving employees, in a panic, rushed into the bathroom, locked the door, and clutched the doorknob as if it were the last barrier between them and death. In the darkness, breathing heavily, one of them shakily called 911. The recording of the call that followed became the clearest testimony to the horror these young people had endured. The employee's voice rang out brokenly, hurriedly. "Someone just got shot. Please send the police. Send an ambulance. We're hiding in the bathroom, afraid to come out." On the other end of the line, the emergency dispatcher tried to keep the caller calm, asking repeatedly for the address, the shooter, the victim's condition, but all they could say was panic. "I don't know. I'm not sure. I just heard the gunshot," and ran. Meanwhile, Jaselyn lay motionless on the cold kitchen floor, the fluorescent lights flickering on the spreading pool of blood. If there was ever a moment when life and death were separated by a thin line, it was now. But no one in the bathroom dared to open the door to help. They were paralyzed by fear. Malik could still be out there, gun still in hand, waiting for someone to come out. As the clock ticked down the heavy seconds, the sirens of police cars and ambulances began to wail in the distance. The 911 operators announced, "We've sent someone to the scene. Stay there. Don't open the door until the police knock." In the bathroom, the three people huddled together, trembling, tears mixing with sweat, waiting for the uncertain. Outside, the scene was taking shape. The first police car screeched to a halt in front of the restaurant, its red and blue lights sweeping across the deserted parking lot. Armed police rushed in, checking every dark corner. And when they opened the front door, the first thing they saw was the lifeless body of Jaselyn Horne. She was no longer breathing. The bullet holes in her body were cold evidence that any help was too late. The police knocked on the bathroom door. "Police! Open up! You're safe!" Three employees stepped out timidly, their faces pale, their eyes still wide with fear. They couldn't take their eyes off Jaselyn, and the feeling that they had left her lying there, alone, in her final moments, would haunt them forever. Meanwhile, Malik Crosby was no longer at the scene. He had fled, disappearing into the Charlotte night. But the evidence was clear. His time card, witness statements, and surveillance camera footage. Within 24 hours, the police had identified him as the prime suspect. The next morning, the CMPD Violent Crimes Task Force found Malik. He was unarmed, unresisting, and bowed his head as he was taken away in handcuffs. At 20, he was walking down a path that had never been his destiny just the night before, that of a murderer. While the police were completing their case, something else was happening outside the cookout. People were starting to gather. Flowers, candles, and photos of Jaselyn were placed at the entrance, turning the restaurant into an impromptu memorial. Friends, co-workers, and even people who had never known her stopped, bowed their heads, and left a few words of farewell. Jaselyn's father, John Horne, arrived at the scene, silently looking at the blood still smeared on the tile. His eyes were heavy, his voice choked as he told reporters, "He was my firstborn. He didn't deserve to die like that. He lived only for his little boy. And now he's going to grow up without a mother." Other co-workers couldn't hide their shock either. "They were both good people," said a woman who worked the same night shift. No one could believe it. No one thought Malik could do this. The shock, the denial, the devastation, all mixed together into a collective grief. But if Jaselyn's death had closed one door, Malik's bringing a gun to work opened another. The burning question of the workplace and gun control. Why would a 20-year-old employee with no criminal record feel the need to carry a concealed gun on his person at work? Who gave him the right to carry such a deadly weapon? And more importantly, Could the tragedy have been prevented if one of the three brave employees had stepped in and intervened before things got too far? The incident quickly spread throughout Charlotte, becoming a hot topic in the media. People were not only mourning the murder of a young mother, but also shuddering at the fact that a small argument at work could turn into a murder in a matter of seconds. In the early days after the tragedy, friends and relatives gathered to hold a memorial service for Jaselyn. They released balloons, lit candles, hugged each other in tears. They recalled her laughter, her kindness, her unfulfilled dreams. But to her young son, her death was not an abstract concept. It was just a huge absence, a question he could not yet understand. Where is Mom? And Malik, sitting in his detention cell, facing charges of first-degree murder, was silent, without explanation. They say he bowed his head, his eyes red, showing no remorse or resistance, just a young man, bound by a rash decision whose consequences would last a lifetime. And so, on one side, a child lost his mother, a family lost a daughter, friends lost a dear friend. On the other side, a young man lost his freedom, lost his future, and became a symbol of the destruction that a moment of anger can cause. In those days, the entire city of Charlotte seemed to ask itself a question. Was this just a random murder, or was it a sign of a society losing its capacity for restraint and forgiveness? The answer, perhaps, was not easy to find. But one thing was certain. The moment 5 bullets rang out in the cookout kitchen changed everything forever. And ahead, as the case entered court, another big question awaited. What punishment would Malik receive for his actions? And will justice really bring peace to Jaselyn's family, or just open up a new cycle of pain and suffering? There are many haunting details behind it, from the courtroom to the most unexpected forgiveness that few could have imagined. If you want to know what happened in that decisive moment, click subscribe to go to the end of the story. When Malik Crosby was arrested and taken to the Mecklenburg County Detention Center, the atmosphere in Charlotte was still shaking. The headlines were loud. Cookout employee, killed by co-worker, over a dirty pan. Public outrage was building, and people were demanding the harshest punishment. With 5 shots fired and a young life taken, Malik faced the most serious charge North Carolina law could impose: first-degree murder. In this state, that charge carries 2 possibilities: life in prison without parole, or the death penalty. Both were too harsh for a 20-year-old with no criminal record. But the law doesn't measure youth. It doesn't measure a clean record. It only looks at the result: a dead woman. And he pulled the trigger. The courtroom was packed on Malik's first day in court. Reporters crowded in, cameras following his every move. In the dock, Malik bowed his head, his thin shoulders shaking. The judge read the verdict: no bail. Malik would remain in custody pending trial. The news rang out outside, where Jaselyn's family sat silently. No applause, no cheers. Over the next several months, lawyers for both sides argued fiercely. The prosecutors emphasized the 5 shots, emphasized that Malik had been carrying a gun from the beginning, that the act was not impulsive but premeditated. They insisted that this was premeditated murder, but the defense attorneys offered a different perspective. They portrayed Malik as an ordinary young man with no criminal record, no signs of violence, pushed to the limit in a moment of extreme stress. They emphasized the impulsive element after being hit in the face by a frying pan, that it was a reaction to intense emotion, not premeditated. North Carolina law is clear. If there was intent and preparation, the charge is first-degree murder. But if the act was an act of passion, the charge is reduced to voluntary manslaughter, a much lighter sentence. And here's the key point. Did Malik intend to kill Jaselyn? Or was it just a fit of rage? The prosecutor showed the surveillance video. Malik and Jaselyn exchanging words, then the frying pan flying, then the gunshots. The whole thing happened in less than a minute. It was that swiftness, paradoxically, that was the basis for the reduction. Because in the eyes of the law, a sudden outburst of anger is not premeditated. After months of closed-door negotiations, a deal was finally reached. On the 24th of October, 2024, Malik Crosby pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. His sentence: 51 to 74 months in prison, equivalent to about 4 to 6 years. Malik was credited with 221 days already incarcerated. That number shocked many. Only 4 to 6 years for a life taken away. In the courtroom that day, no one was silent when the sentence was announced. Some shook their heads, some cried, some were angry, saying that justice was too lenient. But then, amid the chaotic wave of emotions, a voice rang out, making the whole room fall into silence. It was Jaselyn's father, Mr. John Horne. He stood up, his eyes filled with tears but his voice calm. He looked straight at Malik and said, "My family forgives you. We have to stop killing each other. Enough. The violence has to stop." The whole courtroom was stunned. No one could have expected that in the moment when a father had just lost his daughter. Instead of demanding maximum punishment, instead of screaming for justice, he would choose to forgive. That image spread in the press, causing public opinion to be divided. Some called him an example of compassion, of faith. Others thought that forgiveness was too lenient, that it ignored justice for Jaselyn. But anyway, that moment turned a tense court session into a moment of calm. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not erase the pain. But forgiveness, in John Horne's words, is a way to end the cycle of hatred. If he chooses to hate, it will be passed on to the next generation, haunting the young grandchild who has lost his mother. He does not want this tragedy to create new wounds. In the courtroom, Malik raised his head for the first time. His eyes were red, his lips trembled, but he could not speak. Perhaps he himself did not understand why. In the midst of all the pain he had caused, the family chose to forgive. After the trial, the press called this a humane ending to an absurd tragedy. But beneath the flowery words was an undeniable reality. Jaselyn was dead, her son would grow up without a mother, and Malik would be released from prison before the age of 30, with his whole life ahead of him. The burning question is, was justice truly served? Or was it simply a compromise between law and mercy? There's more to the story that will make you think. If you want to know how the aftershocks of this tragedy haunt your colleagues, your family, and the city of Charlotte, subscribe to the final part of the story. After the trial ended, the newspapers gradually withdrew from the story. But for those who lived through it, the aftershocks still reverberated every day. The cookout restaurant on Sunset Boulevard remained open, and customers continued to come to eat as if nothing had happened. But for the employees who were there that night, the place would never be the same again. Some quit their jobs immediately after the incident. They could not return to that kitchen, once filled with laughter, now only memories of gunshots and the image of their fallen colleagues. Those who remained also said that every time they heard the sound of pots and pans falling, they were startled. Their hearts clenched as if a gun had just gone off again. A restaurant that was once considered a second family had become a scar that no one dared to look at. Outside, memorials continued. The community came out, laid flowers, lit candles, and put pictures of Jaselyn on the glass wall. Some people who never knew her were moved to tears, because the story was so absurd. A young mother, gone because of a dirty pan, and a moment of impulsiveness. But the most painful thing was for the 5-year-old boy, Jaselyn's son. At the memorial service, the boy stood still, holding a balloon, his eyes looking around blankly, not understanding why his mother had not come home. His grandfather, John Horne, hugged his grandson tightly, both as a support and as the one who would take on the burden of raising his daughter. He doesn't understand. He still asks where his mother is. I can only tell him that his mother is in heaven, looking down and watching over him, he shared. Choking up, That tragedy was not only the story of a family, but also a wake-up call for the whole society. People began to debate. How could a 20-year-old young man, with no criminal record, easily get a gun? Why can the workplace, where people come to earn a living, turn into a murder scene because of a lack of conflict resolution skills? And more importantly, is forgiveness enough to heal invisible wounds? Or is it just a thin veil covering up the pain that never goes away? Psychologists analyze. The night shift is an ideal environment for escalating conflicts. The human body is exhausted, sleep-deprived, stressed, causing emotions to lose control. A curse, an impulsive action, in that situation, can turn into a tragedy if combined with the presence of a weapon. It's not that Malik is cold-blooded by nature, said an expert, but when there is a gun in that kitchen, even the smallest argument can turn into death. People still clearly remember the chain of events. Arguing, cursing, throwing the pan, pulling the trigger. Just 4 short steps, taking place in a few dozen seconds, took 1 life, and ruined 2. If at any point, someone had stopped, held back, stepped outside to breathe, the tragedy might not have happened. But if is always too late. As time passed, Malik began serving his sentence in prison. He would be released before he was 30, still young enough to rebuild his life, but forever scarred by a murder conviction. Meanwhile, Jaselyn's son would grow up without his mother, with only faint memories of her soft singing in the kitchen, and the photos she had posted on social media. Jaselyn's father, who forgave, has now become a symbol of faith and tolerance. But every time he looks at his grandchild, he still chokes up. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. Forgiveness only keeps us from letting the pain turn into hatred. Jaselyn Horne's story has ended on legal papers, but in the hearts of those who witnessed it, it remains like an unhealed wound. It poses a difficult question for each of us. In life, when faced with conflict, which way will you choose? Keep quiet and leave to avoid an explosion, or fight back to protect yourself? And if you lose a loved one to a moment of senseless violence, do you have the strength to forgive like Jaselyn's father, or will you let hatred lead the way? Perhaps that is the most painful lesson that this tragedy leaves behind. There are many other seemingly small everyday stories that contain great lessons about life and death, about anger and forgiveness. If you believe these stories are worth listening to, please subscribe so you don't miss the next documentaries.